If you like what you're listening to, support me on Patreon, patreon.com/mtgbooks. Do it. Chapter 4, Messenger. Grevin drew his black-bladed sword in a swift, fluid motion.
You're either a madman or a liar. In any case, your life is forfeit. Get him.
The guards lowered their spears, charged. Kovacs, utterly composed, made no immediate move to evade them. When the soldiers were 10 paces away, the smooth black floor suddenly turned to jelly. The soldiers' feet sank into the black goo and were held fast.
Dreadlord, he commands the flowstone,
Dorian cried. Grevin circled wide around the mired troops. Kovacs edged away from Grevin, drawing his own sword. He seemed wary of engaging the hulking warrior. Grevin leveled his weapon.
You have some influence over the flowstone, but you don't command it as Rath did, do you?
He cut wide circles in the air with his wickedly curved blade.
Can you direct my control rod, imposter? You have this one chance before I kill you.
He made a terrific overhand slash at Kovacs, who parried shakily. Urza pushed to the front of the crowd of the frightened courtiers. Kovacs' aura was astonishingly dense and dark, far stronger than had been on Weatherlight, and it extended to where the soldiers were stuck in the grip of the flowstone. He had little power left to fend off Grevin, however. Grevin came on fiercely, cutting at Kovacs' head, thrusting at his stomach and legs. One underhand lunge was blocked in the last second by Kovacs' lighter blade. Grevin's great muscles bulged, and he brought his blade up against Kovacs' full resistance. The latter's sword snapped, and the flowstone blade went skittering away, stopping at Urza's feet. To his astonishment, the broken blade sprouted tiny legs, stood up, and began marching back to rejoin itself to Kovacs' hilt. Taking his sword in both hands, Grevin raised it high for a death blow. The flowstone released the soldiers, and the section of the floor between Grevin and Kovacs heaved up to ward off the warrior's blow. Grevin's blade struck fast in the flowstone shield. He grunted and tugged at the embedded blade. Kovacs, breathing hard, searched for a weapon for which to strike the distracted Grevin. 3 deep, even tones echoed through the vast space like a tolling of a great bell. A shockwave blasted down the dream halls, silent and powerful. Lightly dressed courtiers went sprawling. Urza dropped on his face and clawed at the hard pavement. To his amazement, his fingers probed shallow handholds in the flowstone. The soldiers, buffeted by the noiseless blast, struggled to keep formation. Kovacs' flowstone shield receded. Grevin recovered his sword but stayed his hand. The tremendous displacement of air could mean only one thing. The emissary was coming. Tumbling through the air down the center of the hall came a gray cube, turning successive faces toward them as it came. It grew rapidly in size. Only Grevin and Kovacs held their ground. Courtiers and soldiers, cowed by the enormous power confronting them, backed away. Once the wall of wind ceased, Urza raised his head to see what was happening. The cube stabilized, hovering a few inches off the floor. It was at least 30 feet to a side, and its boiling, misty surface revealed no details of its purpose or composition. Behind the veil of gray, there was movement. Bumps rippled the facing surface of the cube. The phantom gong tolled 3 more times, and a hand appeared through the cube. A lithe, slender hand, gloved in a black gauntlet. A knee and toe appeared, then the leg connecting them. In a simple, natural movement, the emissary stepped through the portal into the dream halls. The emissary was dwarfed by Grevin. Clothed head to toe in attenuated sable armor plate, the emissary was only slightly taller than Urtai. The closed helmet turned this way and that, surveying the scene. The emissary raised a hand, but not in a greeting. A small device Phyrexian held made a chirping sound, and the portal began to shrink. As it did, it spat out 4 large black metal boxes. The cube shrank to the size of a small nut, tumbling in the air as it hovered. The emissary's control device chirped again, and the tiny cube vanished. Back went the device into a pouch on the emissary's belt. Air rushed in to fill the space of the departed portal. Soldiers and courtiers dragged themselves into some semblance of order. Urtai stood up, absently combing his tousled hair with his fingers. The emissary stood motionless, and Urtai wondered for a moment if the Phyrexians had sent a mechanical creature like Karn, his former crewmate. Slowly, the stranger raised its hand to its helmet. The headpiece slipped off with an audible hiss. "It's a girl," Urtai said.
"Be silent," Grevin said.
He went down on one knee.
"All hail the plenipotentiary of the Supreme Master of Phyrexia."
With much rustling of stiff cloth and squeaking metal, the delegation knelt before the emissary. Urtai was the first to stand. He wanted a better view of this girl from another plane. Her features were sharp, like the elves of his world. She had high, pointed ears and the spatulate cheekbones of a pure-blooded elf. Her eyes, he saw, were identically hued. Incongruous freckles dotted her nose and cheeks. Her armor fit as if matte black skin, and where it ended, her own pale complexion revealed strange, dark cross-hatching lines. In spite of the awesome presence of Phyrexia she bore with her, the emissary looked to be little more than Urtai's age, a human equivalent of 19 years old. Krovax bowed smoothly.
"Greetings, Excellency. Welcome to Rath."
She looked at him blankly. "Who are you?" Urtai sniggered. At a nod from Grevin, 2 soldiers seized the young sorcerer in an unfriendly grip.
"I am Krovax, the new Evancar of Rath."
"I've heard of you," the emissary answered coolly. "You exceed yourself. I'm here to appoint a new governor, and I've not chosen you yet." Krovax visibly recoiled. Around him, the flowstone floor rose in tiny peaks like a tempest-tossed lake. It quickly subsided. Grevin stepped forward.
"Grevin Ilvek, commander of all Citadel forces and captain of the airship Predator. At your Excellency's service."
"Commander?" What a flat, emotionless voice she has, Urtai thought. The members of the court, led by Dorian Ildal, greeted the emissary in turn, each swearing undying loyalty to her and the power she represented. She accepted their boot-licking and toadying with the same indifference with which she received Krovax's arrogance. "What about me?" Urtai called out. The soldier holding his right arm let go and gave the sorcerer a resounding rap on the back of the head. "Who's that?" asked the emissary.
"No one, Excellency. Prisoner of war,"
Grevin explained. "You bring prisoners to me? Why?"
"Good question,"
said Krovax.
"This one has a certain talent for magic," Grevin said. "I brought him along to witness your arrival, Excellency, as an object lesson."
"Has he been interrogated?" Grevin steeled himself for punishment.
"No, Excellency."
"The first task of a captor is to extract information from prisoners," the girl said. "You will see to his interrogation, Grevin Ilvek."
"At once, Excellency."
He signaled the guards to drag Urtai away. Urtai looked between the hulking soldiers and said, "You haven't told us your name." Grevin was about to order Urtai silenced, but the emissary stopped him. "A logical question. My name is Belby." "My name is Urtai. I was first in my—"
"Take him away,"
Grevin said irritably.
"I will question him myself."
Krovax extended his arm to lead Belby from the hall. She ignored his pretense of gallantry and walked briskly on. Grevin asked about the crates sent with her. "Have them sent to the Evancar's quarters. I will occupy them," she said. This was Mog work, but the smelly brutes were forbidden to enter the dream halls. Grevin moved as if he was about to order the guards to remove the crates when Krovax made a suggestion.
"Let the courtiers do it,"
he said.
"The palace is their business, isn't it?"
Dorian blanched at the prospective exertion. "We're not laborers." Belby said, "Do as Krovax says." "But, Your Excellency," Dorian protested.
This man is an intruder, as much an enemy as the wart Urtai,
Grevin said, pointing at Krovax.
By rights, he should be in a cell too.
No, Belby said. This one has received the attention of the overlords. He's not Evankar yet, but he stands in contention for the post. So long as his orders do not contradict mine, he will be obeyed. Krovax's altered face split wide in an unpleasant grin.
What are you waiting for? See to the emissary's baggage.
Dorian and the others filed past Krovax. The metal cases were 6 feet long and half as wide. The pampered, in some cases elderly, courtiers struggled to lift the heavy containers to their shoulders. Krovax could not restrain himself from laughing when one aged doll collapsed, bringing a crate down on himself. Dorian directed the rest of the courtiers to hoist the box off the fallen man. Blood stained the old man's gold-trimmed robe, and his face had gone the color of cold ashes. Dorian lifted the man's wrists. He's dead, his voice choked. Krovax stood over them.
Useless parasite,
he said. His brow furrowed, and a segment of the floor detached itself and formed a stretcher. Walking on short flowstone legs, the stretcher bore the body of the elderly courtier from the hall. Dorian looked up at him with tears in his eyes.
If you command the stone, why don't you order it to carry the emissary's baggage?
Krovax grabbed Dorian's collar and effortlessly lifted the corpulent chamberlain to his feet.
Prove your devotion to the overlords by carrying Her Excellency's baggage. All of you!
He roared. Urtai and his escorts had lingered, watching this scene unfold. This is bad, Urtai muttered. He's gone mad. Utterly mad. He was hustled away. Belby, Grevin, Krovax, and the honor guard stood by as the aged and soft-living members of the Evankar's court struggled to carry Belby's crates. Belby gestured to Dorian. What is on that man's face?
Tears,
said Grevin. A saline solution excreted for the purpose of removing irritations from the surface of the cornea.
The old man who was killed was Chamberlain before Dorian,
Grevin said.
He was Dorian's father.
Belby started for the Evankar's quarters without waiting for her baggage. Grevin excused himself to see to Urtai's interrogation. Before he left, he said,
If Your Excellency needs assistance or protection, you need only call. There are guards posted throughout the citadel.
He shot Krovax a warning look and departed. What remained of the honor guard awaited her orders.
What shall we do, Excellency?
Asked Nasser. Carry on with your duties, she said.
And I?
Krovax asked. If you're to command the forces of Rath, you should expect the army and become familiar with it. They have performed poorly of late, have they not?
It's true, Your Excellency,
Nasser said grimly.
There was great confusion when we found we had to deal with both rebels and an enemy airship.
Very well. In 5 intervals, I expect to hear your military report, Krovax. Inform the Chamberlain and Grevin Levesque that I want them present as well. She walked away. Krovax watched her go.
Man to man, what do you make of her?
Mused Krovax. Very strange, the sergeant said. Why would the Overlord send a young girl on such a mission?
There's a reason, Sergeant. We just don't see it yet. The Overlords do nothing without a well-thought-out reason. By the way, what's your name?
Nasser, sir.
How long have you served, Grevin Levesque?
7 years, sir.
7 years, and you only command a troop of palace guards? Grevin does not appreciate you.
Nasser met the other man's gaze. No, sir, he does not.
We'll have to remedy that.
He held out his hand.
Lead on.
Nasser formed the honor guard and marched them away. Krovax strolled behind them, smiling at some private amusement. The sound of marching feet receded in the distance. Belby took a deep breath. Alone again, thankfully. Though she'd been on Rath scarcely an hour, she was feeling bruised by the experience. She found the company of the Citadel's inhabitants wearing. The great hulking presence of Grevin, the soldiers so wrapped in armor as to seem less alive than the Phyrexian priests she'd encountered, the court officials with their washed-out, anxious faces always ready with a whisper and an open palm. Her master, Abigail Drow, never told her that people were like this. The only two that interested her were the young one called Urtai and the dark one called Krovax. They were very different types. Urtai radiated brash wit and vast self-confidence, even with shackles on his feet. Krovax was dangerous. She could tell he'd been to Phyrexia and received the special attention of fourth-level artificers. She walked unerringly to the Flowbot lift that could take her to the Ivankar's suite of rooms halfway up the Great Tower. A detailed schematic of the stronghold had been implanted in her mind when she was made. Every strut, every brace, every creeping flesh-stone appliance was as familiar to her as her own hands. Yet everything was strange, too, because she knew she'd never been here before. She stepped into the Flowbot lift. The conveyance didn't budge, so she prompted it. To the Ivankar's quarters. The Citadel had existed a long time, and successive occupants had altered, decorated, and embellished it as they saw fit. Belby passed through floors reflecting the taste of 6 previous Ivankars, each new master having overlaid his predecessor's alterations. The basic structure was a shell of brassy Phyrexian alloy and ceramic, over which were layers of flowstone designed to resemble wood, marble, glass, and so forth. Its organic form survived every decorative whim, and centuries of human habitation afflicted it like scars on the body of great sea beast. A squeaky voice announced each floor as they passed. Observation deck, Courtier's apartments, Flowbot repair shop, Ivankar's museum. Stop, Belby said. The lift shuddered into place. They were halfway between floors. Go down to the Ivankar's museum. The lift obediently climbed down several feet. Belby stepped up the platform. The floor was dark, with only a few reflective glints showing. Light, she ordered. Nothing happened. I want light. Some flowstone globes burst into full illumination. Other contrary appliances refused to light at all. As a result, the room was harshly shadowed, a condition made worse by the bizarre contents of the museum. Volrath had made it his business to catalog all forms of life on Rath. Specimens of every species were here, carefully preserved and mounted on marble flowstone pedestals. There were animals, birds, reptiles, fish, all with staring glass eyes. Some of the specimens were old and suffered from neglect and decay. As Belby walked slowly past, she touched the plumage of a stuffed bird. Pale blue feathers turned to dust in her hands. Belby brushed the powder away, and a small 2-legged machine scuttled from the shadows, its bell-shaped proboscis noisily sucking up the offending dust. Volrath hadn't settled for just animals. Each sentient race on Rath was represented by 4 preserved specimens. Adult male, adult female, child female, all in appropriate costume and with typical accoutrement. She passed exhibits of the core, the doll, and the Vec. Sleek, powerful merfolk were artfully displayed inside blocks of transparent green flowstone, simulating the sea in which they lived. The last race displayed were the sky-shroud elves. Only a single example was provided, a fully grown male. Belby paused, arrested by what she saw. The face, though masculine, was very similar to hers. She climbed on the pedestal with the embalmed elf and stared curiously into his long, dead face. Who were you? Some hunter? Some fisher the Ivankar's soldiers caught one day? Where did you live? Why do you look like me? Belby touched the elf's face. It was cold, dry, and hard. The taxidermist had given the elf blue-gray eyes. She touched the dusty pupil with her fingertip. It was not glass. It yielded to her touch. Belby jumped down from the pedestal, trembling. She rubbed her hands repeatedly on the skirt of her armor. The room had suddenly grown small and oppressive. She had to get out. Now. The lift was waiting for her. She leaped aboard and said, Go! Go where? Asked the device. The Ivankar's quarters, at once. By the time the platform stopped at the lowest level of the Ivankar's suite, the structure had narrowed to a mere 200 feet in diameter. The antechamber was cool and dim. Give me light! The room gradually brightened with an intense, pulsating blue light. Belby moved to the center of the room as the walls passed from opaque to translucent. The throbbing blue light was the energy beam outside. She could feel the energy bleeding through the walls on her skin. The bottom floor of the suite was one large room with inward curving walls, and as she stood, fascinated by the energy passing between the flowstone factory and the hub, the floor began to flicker. Languorous waves of color circled the floor in alternating bands of red, orange, yellow, green, and blue. Centered in the silent vortex of color, Belby stood in silence. The chromatic waves circled the room around her feet. She knew this was caused by feedback in the flowstone as it soaked up the energy seeping through the walls, but it was delightful, whatever the cause. She drifted a few steps toward the stairs leading to the next floor. As she did, the color wheel shifted to recenter on her new position. Amused, she backed up a few feet. The clockwise swirl followed her. Belby trotted around the room. Her re-engineered legs were capable of formidable speed, but in the confines of the tower, she did not test her limits. The spectral bands in the floor chased her, no matter how fast she ran. Static charges built up in the air. Belby held out her hands, laughing as white sparks discharged from her fingertips. On her 20th circuit around the room, she noticed Krovax standing by the lift. She skidded to a stop. The floor went through noiseless paroxysms of clashing color, finally settling into its wheel pattern once more. "Light," she said. Her heart was beating rapidly, and her hair was damp with sweat. The walls became opaque, and the artificial lighting came up. Krovax, hands clasped behind his back, looked somber in his black robes and acid-etched Phyrexian breastplate. "What do you want?" Belby asked.
I came to see if you were all right, Excellency.
He used the language of a subordinate, but he did not speak like one.
From below, we could see colored lightning playing about the tower. I didn't realize you were enjoying yourself.
"An amusing effect," she replied. "Discovered it by accident."
An interesting substance, flowstone. It can be controlled if one has the will to do so. Half controlled and half influenced. It is unpredictable. Please be careful, Excellency.
Without a spoken command, the sides of the lift rose to enclose Krovax.
Until later,
He said as the device sank through the floor. She was tired. Being on display was wearing. Her sprint around the room used up what vitality she had left. Belby climbed the ornate stairs to the next floor, and Avankar could have willed the stairs to carry him, but she had to make her own progress. She wandered through chambers filled with paintings and statues, mostly warriors' portraits and battle scenes. Most of the individual images bore the face of Volrath. Belby found it odd anyone would want to be surrounded by pictures of himself, especially such exaggerated, extravagant images. Volrath slaying an entire army with just his sword. A colossal Volrath, wreathed in a cloud standing astride the stronghold. Volrath trampling nations and worlds beneath his feet. Interspersed among the statues, paintings, and tapestries were more useful items. Cabinets, cupboards, shelves, chairs, settees. The furniture was uniformly hard when Belby sat on it. From its dished and bulged shapes, she deduced it was flowstone and that it would soften with the Avankar, but no one else. She found a bed at last, a large circular mattress laden with handsome quilts and pillows. There were gifts of the Avankar subjects, and thankfully were not flowstone. The bed was sized for a very tall occupant, so she had to boost herself up. As she sat there, her feet dangling, she noticed another statue, much different from all the others. It was cited that only a person lying on the bed could see it in the adjoining room. Belby hopped down for a closer look. The statue, executed in genuine white marble, depicted two figures facing each other. The taller figure was inescapably Volrath, though this was the only statue in which he wore royal robes instead of armor. His hand was extended, clasping the hand of the facing figure. Belby circled the 12-foot-high statue, trying to see who the other figure was. The figure facing Volrath was shorter and proportioned like a normal man. He had neck-length hair and the suggestion of a beard, and was likewise dressed in peaceful fashion. When Belby finally reached a spot where she could see, she discovered the figure with Volrath had no face at all. "Let's talk this over," Urtai said. Grevin nodded to his two Mog warders, who tore Urtai's shirt from his back. He didn't regret the loss of the garment, as it was in tatters anyway, but he did take an exception to the assorted irons roasting in a brazier not 3 feet away. "This isn't going to accomplish anything," Urtai added. "I've nothing to say." Grevin took an instrument from his belt pouch, a slender red rod, wound in tight, flat coil. He pinched the end of the coil between his fingers, and it slowly unrolled into a rigid rod. What is that?" Urtai asked, clearing his suddenly tight throat. The hulking warrior loomed over him. He gave one end of the rod a twist, and short spikes appeared on the opposite end. Urtai decided he preferred the branding irons. He backed away. The wall stopped him. Again, Grevin gestured to the Mogs, who seized Urtai's ankles. They jerked his right foot up, and Grevin bent over, rod in hand. Urtai shut his eyes. Click! The heavy shackle fell from his leg. Urtai opened his eyes in time to see Grevin withdraw a spiky rod from the keyhole. He repeated the operation on the other shackle.
Keyworm,
The warrior said, tucking the slowly coiling creature back in his pouch. By all the colors, Urtai said, sighing gustily. I thought the warder slammed him against the wall. Grevin picked up an iron. The tip was pale orange, almost white hot.
Now, said Grevin, tell me about Weatherlight.
Urtai, his hands pinned, closed his eyes and conjured a psychokinetic blast from his locus, his solar plexus. Such conjurations were not as controllable as ones channeled through the hands, but considering his situation, he had little choice. He mentally hurled it at Grevin and was rewarded by the sound of the iron clattering to the floor.
I can keep this up longer than you,
Grevin said. He retrieved the fallen iron, now cooled to a cherry red, and returned it to the fire.
This can take all day, or it can be over when you wish it to be. What do you say?
A modicum of resistance is mandatory? Urtai said faintly. After all, the most naturally talented sorcerer of the age. Grevin picked up fresh, hot irons in each hand.
Down here, boy, you're just meat.